All right. Hello, everyone. This is Sherman Jumbo here with the one and only start to finish super mega awesome in a perfect world custom ammo tutorial for H3VR. So this tutorial is a combination of stuff from GamerNair's old custom ammo tutorial, which it's good. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little outdated, a little incomplete, and it's also a combination of my own trial and error and from things that I have asked other people and gotten answers from, but had never been formally put into writing. So I'll be told this is the stuff that I wish I knew when I was making custom ammo for the first time. I promise it's not that hard. Stick with me, and everything will be a-okay. So I'm already going to assume that you have some idea of how to make a custom object in H3. And you have meat kit set up at the bare minimum. So the first thing we do when we make a custom object is we open Blender and we minimize Unity. So for the example here, I'm just going to be taking the mini shell model that I made for the Module 870 mod and making it a normal 12 gauge round and just playing around with it, using that as an example. So the first thing you want to do is decide if you're going to make a custom ammo type for an existing vanilla caliber, or if you're going to make your own ammo from scratch. You're going to make a new caliber, a new caliber of ammo. So if you're making a new ammo type for a vanilla caliber, one of the first things you should do is pull the base model from the vanilla game of whatever that shell is, because it's extremely important that you know what that model's origin point is, because if you have the vanilla round, I just pulled it using Asset Studio GUI. Nice software. There are probably other alternatives that work for Unity the same way, but if you use that, you get this model, and then you need to make sure that your ammo model has the exact same origin as the new model. So if you line these up, if you make everything 000 in Blender, everything should overlap perfectly. This has to be true, otherwise the proxy round positions, like if you put a round in the chamber, or if you have a moving round as part of, if you're pulling back on your handgun slide and you see the bullet move, those positions are going to be all wonky if the origins are not properly set to 0 on their location and their rotation. So, but if you're making a custom ammo from scratch, like if you're making a new caliber, that's less of a big deal. Just, make sure you've got your set origin, center mass volume, and then make sure you apply your transforms. But if this isn't 0 and 0, and it's all lined up, things are going to go wrong. You also want to make sure, obviously, that your origin points for your spent and unspent renders are the exact same, otherwise things are going to look wonky. And you want to make sure that when you're exporting this from Blender, you export it such that the rotation and scale and everything is preserved properly. The default FBX exporter in Blender kind of sucks for that. You have to play a bit with the forward settings and the scaling and stuff to get it perfect. I prefer to use this Unity FBX exporter plugin. I'll link to it in the description. So I would recommend downloading this and using it, because it makes getting it in the proper scale and rotation for Unity much more straightforward. So I'm going to export the FBX and hop on over into Unity. So first thing I'm going to do is just make a new folder. Then we're going to grab our model, if I remember where I put it. There it is. And the first thing we're going to want to do is double check to make sure that this is properly aligned. So if you've exported it correctly, this is good. Let's just drag these out of their parent here. So 0, everything's zeroed, and you're pointing, this z-axis is forward. And the same is true for each of our other things. And if we zero this out, perfect. Everything went exactly as we want it to. This is what you want to see. If it's not like this, something has gone horribly wrong, and you need to go back into Blender and fix the axis that your things are pointing on. Maybe you forgot to apply the transforms. Just make sure this is correct, because if it's not, it's going to bite you in the ass later when you go to test it. So we have our materials. I'm just going to apply, I already have the materials from my other project, so I'm just going to put those in there and get them in the same position. And then, as with any other custom item in H3, the best way to start is with a loaded prefab. So we're going to go into ammunition, assets, weaponry, ammunition, clips, I'm just going to grab the double-aught buckshot prefab, because why the hell not? Bring that into view here. Okay. So you may be tempted to immediately start plugging things into this and then enter play mode. Not quite. There's one thing we want to grab first, which is we're going to scroll down in the ammo, and we're going to look at Ballistic projectile prefab. We're going to double-click that, right-click, copy component, and then we're going to create a new empty game object. Right-click, paste component as new. This is important because if we enter play mode, it's going to delete this, and then we're going to have to enter play mode again if we want to get it back. And it's way easier to work off of prefab than it is to try to add the script and then manually fill things in, because you might miss something and then things go wrong. So that's good. Now we can actually enter the play mode and get our assets all squared away, so that stuff doesn't break when we try to re-enter the editor. It's going to open SteamVR, but my headset's unplugged, so it's not going to do anything. There we go. Now we're just going to name this whatever we want. I'm going to make this a quadruple-aught buckshot round for extra fun. So quadruple-aught mini shell. And we're going to save that as a prefab. Wonderful. So now we're just going to go through the ammo object and just fill out all the fields that we possibly can. Oh, but we should also name this mini shell. There we go. And save this as a prefab, because we'll come back to this in a little bit. We're going to delete the old renderers, because those get cleaned up when we enter play mode. Make sure this is set to 0. And then I like to do this just for cleanliness sake. I disabled the mesh renderer. This doesn't break anything. It just makes it easier to see and work with the round as we see it in the editor. So we've got the generic FVR object bits we can play with here. Grab hold, scroll down, object wrapper, I'll fill that in obviously. Make sure that spawn lockable is checked. If you're making a round, you want to make sure that you're able to spawn lock it. You know, not very ideal to just have a single round and you have to keep spawning new ones from the ammo panel or something. Wonderful. Now we're into the round config section. This is the bit that's unique to the round. So round type, this is sort of the caliber, as opposed to the round class, which is sort of the flavor, like the variant of shell within that. So for this, we're going to leave this as 12 gauge because we're going to make this compatible with vanilla 12 gauge. If you're making a new custom ammo type from scratch, what you're going to have to do is you're going to go, it's like making a new magazine enum. You're going to make an enum. I'm just going to make this a test because I'm not actually going to use it. You're going to make sure this is set to round type as its type. You're going to add a value. You're going to name it something. I'm just going to call it a test. And then you're going to make this presumably a very large negative number, you know, something you're going to remember. I have a whole spreadsheet that I keep track of all my custom enums and stuff so I don't get things mixed up or accidentally use the same one twice because that tends to make the game a bit unhappy. And then once this is in place, it's just like with the magazine. Meat kit, scripts, import game, let it think, tell it to go ahead, we don't want to make a backup, and then you restart your editor. And then once you've closed and reopened Unity, you are able to select your custom round type as a thing. Like these are all the custom ones that I've made, all the Pixelgun ammo, the Doom ammo, all that other fun stuff. So once you've got your round type assigned, you're going to want to do your round class. Now, I have heard reports that if you try to, you can make custom round classes the same way you do custom round types, but I've heard reports that that can break things. So I would heavily recommend you just use a vanilla round class. And this is just like a ball, FMJ, JHP, tracer, even in the more esoteric stuff like, you know, the Meat Fortress round types, the Carl Gustav round types, like, you know. And if you're making a vanilla type, if you're making a new ammo type for a vanilla caliber, you have to make sure that this is set to something that's not used by another round type. So, you know, 12 gauge is sort of a bad one to do this on because there's already so many types of 12 gauge ammo in game. But if you just go crazy, like if we just look up buckshot, what's available? Sure, let's make it mega buckshot, which I think is used by like the oversized 1911. So this just ensures that we're not going to double up on round types. So we've got that filled out. Okay, is high pressure? It's sort of self-explanatory. It's not a super well-used function. There aren't a ton of things in game that care about high pressure versus low pressure. I know like grenade launchers, I think, have different ammo profiles for high versus low pressure shells. Obviously, the little plastic flare gun will break if you try to fire high pressure rounds through it. You know, just use your best judgment. Usually just leave it as whatever the prefab is. Projectile prefab, we'll come back to that at the end in a second here. Number of projectiles and projectile spread. Self-explanatory. For most things, this will just be one projectile with 0 degrees of spread. But for shotgun shells here, obviously, we're going to do 10 projectiles, say, and then the spread is in degrees. So 1 degree is normal double-aught buck. I think number 4 buck has like a 2-degree spread or something, but, you know, use your best judgment, play around with it. You can always change this pretty easily. And we're going to assign our renderers as well. So the unfired renderer, let's drag that in there. Fired renderer, drag that in there. Make sure this is filled out. Things break if this isn't. Okay, on when unfired. This is sort of an interesting use case where if you have a round that you want its physics, you know, its colliders to change fired versus unfired. Let me just grab an example here. Like the Carl Gustav rounds use this in vanilla because, you know, it's more fun to have it that way. So if I grab a shell, big boy shell, we can see if I unlock this, we have on when unfired, we have a fizz capsule. So this capsule is going to be disabled when the round is fired, which would leave us with just the shell casing fizz, which is this stuff. So you can play around with that. Obviously, it's only really useful on really large rounds like this because, I mean, you know, little 12 gauge round, who cares? It's not going to make much difference. Destroyed after counter, I have no idea what this means. Just leave it as whatever the prefab has it. Chamberable and loadable, these should probably always be checked. Unless you're making some kind of disposable gun, you might want to make it not loadable into a magazine or something. Palmable, you know, if it's a really big round, you might want to leave this unchecked, but otherwise you should. Palming dimensions, try to make this as close to the dimensions of the actual shell or actual round as you can. If you need to find the dimensions quickly, you can just grab it and you grab your mesh and put a box collider on it. Box collider. And this will actually scale to the exact bounds of your mesh. So you can just look at what these are and, you know, I think on the prefab they were like 0.02, which is pretty close to what they are on the actual mesh. So that's not going to cause any issues. If we keep going, max palmed amount. This is actually this number plus 1 in your hand. So you can hold 6 shotgun shells, which is 5 palmed plus 1 that you're like holding. So keep that in mind. Proxy rounds, leave this blank, I don't know what it does. Is caseless, you know, self-explanatory. I think the only gun that uses this in vanilla is the G11. This is best used on open bolt guns because it's sort of jank in that if you have a closed bolt gun and you have a caseless round in it and you pull the bolt or you pull the slide back and eject your round, it'll just delete that round. It won't spawn an unfired round for some reason, so the system is a bit slapdash. AFCL has a better caseless script, so you might want to try this out. I've not used it, but it, you know, I think it improves on that behavior and makes it not suck. So give it a try and let me know how that goes. Pop type, this is the, if you have a bunch of loose rounds dumped on the ground and you shoot one, this is the sound that it makes when it goes off when it's not in a gun. Just play with this. Tail class and impact sound, self-explanatory. Tail is the bit of like audio post-processing that's like the bullet crack reverb sound when you fire it indoors or something. Play with that. Impact sound, also explanatory. You've got a ton of options to click through here, like, wow, look at all these things. And then proxy pose, just leave this as standard. It's runtime business you shouldn't mess with. Make sure you've got a rigid body. You can edit your capsule collider. This is important for the ammo boxes because they'll use this capsule, and it has to be a capsule collider, I should say that. If it's a box collider, it will break if you try to spawn an ammo box with your ammo in it. So make sure it has to be a capsule collider. Even if you have like a rectangular round or something, make it a capsule collider facing the Z direction. Otherwise, your ammo boxes will not work. And just make sure this is, it fully encapsulates your entire round. You can see that we've got a little bit of padding on the edges because if you make it too small, like if we made the capsule like this, the rims of the shells would clip together inside the ammo box. So just use your best judgment on this. You can always just edit it on the fly if it's a bit broken. Select our prefab. Okay, we're going to move into the ballistic projectile now. So, oh boy. Take a look at this. So this is the meat and potatoes of the round, if you would. This defines the bullet that spawns when you pull the trigger. So probably the three most important are the mass, the dimensions, and the base muzzle velocity. So you can get these from real life. Like if we're making this quadruple aught buckshot, we can just go to Wikipedia. They have a nice table. It tells us that the mass of the projectile is 0.531 or 5.31 grams. This is mass in kilograms, by the way. Dimensions in meters. Quadruple aught pellet is roughly 9.65 millimeters. So it's a sphere, just copy those over. And then muzzle velocity, let's make it a bit slower. Let's make it like a 350 because it's a shorter shell and it's a bigger pellet, which makes sense. And then once we've got these three fields filled in, we right-click the projectile script and hit area calc. Now this will do some math and it'll give us our kinetic energy per hit, which is just mass times velocity, or 1/2 times velocity, 1/2 mv squared. So it's 1/2 times the mass of the pellet times its velocity squared. And then kinetic energy per square meter base. I don't know how this is exactly calculated, but I know it has something to do with penetration, where the higher this value is, the better penetration your round will have. You can change this dynamically by making a smaller, faster projectile as opposed to a larger, slower one, which, would make sense, I guess, in real life. And also fill in the front area, which is just I think the X times the Y or something. Projectile type. So we've got 4 options here, and they differ by... It's like the ratio of... I don't know. It's like blunt versus piercing damage, and then how much of each the projectile has. Slug rounds are almost exclusively like blunt damage, and they only have a little bit of penetrating damage, which means they're good at dealing with fleshy targets, but they suck at going through armor. And the other end of the spectrum is a penetrator round, which imparts like 90% of its damage or something as penetrating damage, and only 10% is blunt. So it means that if you just kind of wing something with it, wing a Sosig, like, you don't hit that head box, there's a decent chance they'll just get back up, but it'll go through armor pretty easily. And, expanding is a bit more on the blunt damage side. FMJ is sort of an even mix of both. Just play with this. It's sort of, use your best judgment. Like, shotgun shells are sort of, like shotgun pellets, lead pellets are an expanding projectile, as would like a JHP round. Penetrator is like armor piercing. Slug is used for slugs, and I think some really sort of soft target, like expanding rounds. Ignite on hit and vaporize on hit. These are both, if this is enabled, it'll use these chances, so 0.2 would be 20%, to ignite is set things on fire. Good for Dragon's Breath, that kind of stuff. Vaporize is for the dark matter lemon effect from the Half-Life underbarrel grenade launcher rifle thing. It'll do the source engine vaporize where the ragdoll like float into the air and then turn black and fizzle and then like pop. So just play with those, they can be fun. Flight velocity, air drag, and gravity multipliers. Self-explanatory. If you mess with these, it messes with the automatic zeroing on the scope system. So just keep that in mind. It's usually better to use the realistic gravity for that, but if you're doing something goofy, like for my pixel gun rockets that move at like 30 meters a second or whatever, I made those, you just set the gravity multiplier to 0 and they just fly in a straight line because it's funny. So play around with those, but just don't expect the most realistic, like automatic scope zeroing behavior if you mess with these values. Disabled on first impact. This is, does it ricochet or not? If this is checked, the round will just pop when it hits something and it won't bounce around, but if this is left disabled, the round can ricochet. If it hits it like sort of a shallow angle, it'll bounce around a little bit, which can be fun. What else? Impact sound, impact decals. Yeah, play with those. They're what they say on the tin. Suppression event. This is related to, if you shoot near a Sosig but don't hit them, does it suppress them? Do they like duck down and try to dodge your fire? The range, I believe, is how far in meters they can be from the projectile before it imparts suppression, and then intensity is like how strong of a suppressive effect. So, this is, you should sort of scale this based on the caliber of the round. Like a 50 BMG is going to suppress a target a lot more than, a little pellet like this. Delete sound straight down, leave that checked. Source IFF and this other stuff. I think the only rounds that use this in vanilla are some of the Meat Fortress, like Demo Man grenade rounds, where based on what team you're on, it'll be like a red grenade or a blue grenade or just like a gray grenade if you're using it in any other scene. But yeah, you can play around with that. It can be fun, but it's not well used in game. Life and timeouts. This is the max range is the range in units that the round will go before it just gets deleted. Max range random. If you put like 100 here, that means that the range can be any variable between, you know, the upper limit then becomes 5100 and the lower limit is 4900. So, you know, you can use that to make some variable things. If you want to make like, I use it for cluster bomb munitions, so you set a variable lifetime on the cluster bombs. They don't all explode at the same time. You get a nice like ripple effect. And then die timer max is the same thing, but instead of using the maximum range, you're using the maximum time that the projectile can be alive to determine when it is killed. 5 is the default, I think, for performance reasons. Ooh, tracers will come back to you. That'll be at the end of the video for special bonus, extra credit, fun stuff you can do with ammo. Trails, this is for if you have bullet trails enabled in the options panel. It'll, you know, this affects the color that it'll be. Impact effect type override, this is, you can play with this if you want to make it do goofy things. Like, normally the bullet impact type and bullet hole type are, you know, varied depending on the type of surface that you hit, but if you want to force it to be something special for whatever reason, you know, if you want it to be sparks, that's used for tracer rounds, or the, you know, you can play around with that a bit. Submunitions will come back to blast jump. This is for stuff like the OG break action shotgun, where it'll launch you backwards when you fire it. It's not the same as like the Meat Fortress rocket launcher blast jump. This is like, does it throw you backwards when you launch it at the ground or something, and then you can play around with the amount of that. That should be our ballistic projectile. We can just apply the prefab when we've got this all filled out, and then make sure we go and assign it to our round. See, this has gone missing, so we drag from the tray and we apply that, and we are able to just hit apply. Okay, so that's a lot of words for what all of the stuff on the round does. Oh, we want to fix the fizz here. I just noticed that. What's wrong with me? Well, what's wrong with me is that this is take 2 of this video, because I yapped for an hour and it didn't record any of it. Oh well. Either way, we're here now and all is well. So we can probably jump into creating some of the metadata for this round, starting with the object ID. Make sure we fill out our assets. Great. Make sure category is set to cartridge. Make sure, honestly, only 3 of these matter. The era, which for here we're going to set to be modern. The set, which is useful mostly for defining when this can spawn and take and hold. We're just going to make this real, because, or grounded fictional, I guess, because, you know, this could exist pretty easily. And then round power, just set it to shotgun. If you're using a shotgun shell, obviously, you know, pistol, intermediate, this kind of stuff. Round type, make sure you set that to whatever it is. This helps with like magazine patcher, being able to find this and put it in the proper pools. Now we can assign that to our shell. We can create our spawner entry. And just drag that in to fill it out automatically. Come on. Okay, so set this to ammo, and there's a trick here, because if you try to find cartridge, where's the cartridge category? It's not in meat kit for some reason. I don't know why. It just isn't. So if you just type in cartridge, if I can remember how to spell, it'll show up in the cartridge category in vanilla, even though it's not in, you know, it's not from our selectable list of options here. Need an icon, of course. I already took this earlier, so I just put that in there. Image, quadruple alt mini book is displayed in main entry. Make sure that's checked. That's a no-brainer. I play with the mod tags. Is reward, probably, but obviously unchecked. That should be it for that. And now comes a very fun part of making this is we have to right click our system tray, create FVR firearm round display data. This is a very important bit of metadata that helps with the ammo panel. It helps the game find ammo types. It's used for automatic scope zeroing systems. It's important. 9 times out of 10, if something's going wrong with your custom ammo, you should look here first, because it only takes one field in here to be put in wrong, then it causes everything to break. So, display data. Name that something we can use to find later. Okay. Display name. This is what the name of the caliber will be. If you're making it for a vanilla, like if you're adding types to an existing round type, I think this just gets overwritten by what it is in the vanilla game, so it doesn't really matter. Just put 12 gauge in there, because why not? Shotgun, obviously, because this will show up in the shotgun category of the ammo panel. If this isn't assigned, it'll break your mod. I found this out the hard way. Classes, we're going to add one class, but you can obviously add more classes if you have multiple round types, or multiple round classes of the same type. The name, this is what will show up in the ammo panel, and I think it's also used by stuff like Ristimate to show you what the cartridge is. Let's just call it quadruple aught mini shell buckshot. There we go. Make sure this isn't too long. It gets cut off by the ammo panel if it goes beyond some character limit that I can't remember. And then we're going to make this, what did we have it earlier? Mega buckshot. Cost, this defines intake and hold in the ammo panel, purchasing panel. This is how many tokens it will cost to buy this ammo. And then we have to make sure we put our object in there. Is Meat Fortress, check it if it's Meat Fortress, because then it'll automatically get put into the Meat Fortress category at the bottom instead of in whatever you have it set to here. Okay. Make sure this matches what you have it set to in the round, by the way. That and this should be the same. So, we have ballistics data. What the hell do I put here? Well, I have a file, I have a Google Drive link in the description of this video, and you should go to that and download a file called defaultcurves.zip. So when you download that, you want to go into Unity, go into this, click a curve, the gear, presets at the top, this little hamburger, click it, and then you're going to want to click Reveal Current Library Location. This will pop you up a file into a folder, and this is where you'll want to put your defaultcurves.zip folder. You're going to want to go in here, and let's just extract it here. I'm just going to use WinRAR because it's quickly. Thank you, WinRAR. I'm not buying your software because... well, whatever, let's just use the default Windows zip. So that'll give us these files, and we're going to drag them into this folder and allow them to replace the files in this destination. Beautiful. So now those are here. Now we can click this again, and now we have a bunch of new curves to work with here. So for BDCC, which I think is like bullet drag coefficient curve or I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we also have a curve called BDCC, and we can click that and fill it in. Zero which ammo, leave that as 0 because we're gonna zero this first thing, I think. Velocity, mass, and X dimension. You go into your ballistic projectile and you copy these values into here. So that's the mass. The velocity is 350, and then the X dimension is this. Okay, velocity mult, we're going to skip to this. We're going to do the barrel length curve. You'll notice there's a curve called velocity mult barrel. Click that, that'll assign that. And now this curves file includes curves called drop curve and wind curve. Or it just don't use this one. This bullet drop curve, this is bad. Delete that, kill it, it's wrong. What you have to do here is right click and then hit test vel. And now this will automatically fill you in a bullet drop curve that it generates using these parameters. And it'll also fill in a wind curve, but this isn't used in vanilla anyways, so it just is left as a flat line. So we've got this curve now, which is wonderful, because if this curve is wrong or missing, it'll fuck up scope zeroing. So we've got that, that's wonderful. at the bottom here, width, height, Y offset. This is for the ammo boxes. You can just leave it as 0 if you've got your capsule collider set up properly on your shell. And then force cartridge box rotation. This is if you have like a square round or something. It'll, instead of applying a random offset to the rounds in a random rotational offset to the rounds in the ammo box, it'll orient them all in a nice grid pattern. So that can be helpful if you've got strangely shaped rounds. And that is our display data. So a very important file. If something's wrong with your ammo, check here first. If some things are still wrong, make sure that you have ballistic projectiles filled out. Make sure your mesh renderers are filled in. Make sure your round class and type match what's shown in here and here. Okay, we can continue creating the metadata, like build item stuff. So build item. Okay, so now we can fill in our prefabs. This is why making the ballistic projectile its own prefab is important, and we have to make sure that that gets brought into the build item as well. The spawner entry, drop that in there, our object. And now you'll see we have a slot for the round data as well, so make sure that gets brought into the build item, otherwise things will most certainly break. Not you. Not yet. So we're going to create the build root. My hands will stop clicking the wrong things. Build root. Just drag this into build item any. It'll tell us if there's anything wrong with the shell. Didn't mess anything up. Wonderful. Create meat kit. Build profile. Okay. We have to just do this as normal. I'm not actually going to publish this, so I'm just going to call it test. By me, of course, because I'm awesome. And then 1.0.0. We got mini buckshot shells. We need a readme. I'll just pick one from a different mod. And then finally put our build root into this. Let me just select my testing profile. Okay, so if you were content with just making a very basic bullet, you would build your mod and test it to make sure you can stick it in a gun and fire it, and that the chamber, you know, it looks right when you insert it into chambers, and that it, you know, loads and you can do whatever the hell you want with it. However, if you want to do fancy stuff like submunitions or tracers, keep watching, because it's time for submunitions and tracers 101. So, can go into our ballistic projectile here, and if we scroll down, we see that there's a whole thing here for tracers. So, a tracer, it's not that hard, I promise. It's just a mesh with an emissive material on it, and it just follows the bullet. So, we'll just create a new game object under here, just call it like tracer cone or something. I am using the tracer mesh that's from the base game. It's this, let me find it here. It's this sort of hexagonal cone-shaped thing. And then I also have a material that's based on the one from the main game as well. But this can be anything. Don't let me pigeonhole you into believing that you have to use exactly the same mesh as Anton. Like, the world's not going to end. Like, it can be a cube. It can be a different shape. It can be a more, you know, it can be a cone with more faces on it. Just keep in mind that this is what the player is going to see as it flies through the air. It also helps to make this texture emissive. So the color here is set to be this kind of like very emissive bright color, so it looks like a burning, you know, tracer element or whatever. Okay, so now that we have our tracer element parented to our ballistic projectile, we just want to make sure that this is set as the tracer renderer and the tracer itself. And we can apply that. So now this should properly follow along the pellet as it flies through the air. You can use these fields to change the length and width of the tracer on the fly. If you have it's important that you have this set properly, because this also gets affected by stuff like the tracer color override setting in the options panel. Let's say instead, or maybe alongside this, you wanted to have a bullet renderer. So I have some examples of that up here. The first is okay, and also make sure you scale this to something that's actually reasonable, because this tracer is absolutely gargantuan right now. Make sure it's close to the origin of the projectile so it actually follows its position. Okay. So here I have a 40mm grenade. So the important thing we're going to look at now is that the bullet renderer is set to this nade projectile. So it's just very, just this renderer is the bullet. That's what that is. Make sure it's filled out properly, because if it isn't, I think it has a nasty habit of not getting deleted properly when the bullet hits something. So just make sure this is filled in. Extra display is the final one here. If you have something like, I don't know, a rocket, and you want it to leave a smoke trail behind it as it flies, or if you have like a rocket-assisted projectile that has like a blast of fire coming out the back or something, you have like a particle effect, and you plug that into the extra display, which just tells it to, render and shoot projectiles as it flies. You want to make sure that if you're using a particle system, your simulation space is set to world, because if it's set to local, it'll do this. They'll stay fixed to the position of the transform, which is bad. You want it set to world so that the projectiles are spawned in the world and move with the shell as it flies. So, wow, it's a rocket with smoke. It's so cool and realistic. That's that. There's one more example I want to show that. Just hide these real quick. You can also use, you can get creative with this. You can use line renderers are a fun one, because, where did I put this? Oh, nope, don't do that. Grab my railgun slug. Okay. So, that's the wrong item. There we go. So, you can use line renderers either as an extra display or attached directly to the ballistic projectile game object, and you can give your things fancy trails. So for this one, it's like a laser beam. So what I've done is the bullet renderer is empty, but in the extra display here I have a trail effect, and this is a trail renderer with a material element that's got this sort of behavior built into it, so it creates like a proper trail instead of just extending forever until it hits something. And if we move it, wow, we've got a laser beam and it follows the round and it's all fancy and cool. The only drawback with doing it this way is that this trail will immediately be deleted if the round hits something, which is useful for something like this because it's a less visible laser that represents like a really fast little laser projectile. But if you want a fancier lingering laser effect, like I've done here for the exterminator ammunition, you don't put an extra display, but you attach a trail renderer directly to the ballistic projectile. And this has the effect of following the projectiles. You see here we have a nice laser, but it also, it'll linger for about a second after. So when this hits something, it'll stop and then it'll wink out. So you've got sort of a cool lingering laser effect that's I don't know, it's fun. It's cool. I like it. What else have we got? Let's take a look at our projectile here. All right, submunitions. So that was tracers and bullet renderers and extra displays. Again, prefab loading existing ammunition will tell you a lot about how that stuff is set up, and it'll give you ideas for how to do yours. Submunitions are, I like them. They're fun. They're cool. It's a way to level up your custom ammo and make it more exciting, especially in the case of explosives. Don't be fooled by the name submunitions. There's nothing that tells you that this has to be an explosive effect. You can have it spawn any prefab in the game, because how they work is they pop into being when the main projectile impacts something. The main projectile dies, and whatever you have under here will spawn prefabs. This just so happens to be used a lot for explosives, but there's nothing that says that you have to. If you wanted to, you could have a round that spawns a gun, a fully functioning gun, whenever you shoot something. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can do it with this system. So let's just start with, one submunition, element 0 prefabs. So this is where you would put your prefab. Number to spawn, self-explanatory. Trajectory, you can play with this. Random direction, it'll ricochet direction, backwards, forwards cone. I believe it's a 45-degree cone. Type, I don't really know what the difference between any of these is. Look at prefabs, draw your own conclusions. Spawn logic, again, I don't know how this really matters with anything. Speed, this is a range of speeds that the projectile will spawn, that the prefab will spawn at. So, you know, from 100 to 200 meters per second, or if you want it to be a fixed speed, you could just do 200 to 200. And then cone lerp, I don't know what this does. Firearm references submunition, I don't really know what this does. Probably vegetables, weird contract griller stuff. Okay, so to look at how prefabs or submunitions look, let's look at some examples. So if we go back into our explosives here, I have a 40 millimeter grenade that is set to spawn 2 submunitions when it hits something. We have a thing called the force sound, and we have an explosive visual effect. So the force sound is sort of the meat of your explosion. This is, you know, as the name would imply, it's the force, it's the explosion, like damage and force spawner, and the sound of it hitting something. So if you're doing an explosive submunition, you should use the grenade explosion script. There are other scripts I think that do explosives, but this is just the best one to use because I said so. Get owned. So explosion radius, this is the blast radius in meters. Force, I don't know what this does. I don't know what it means. I assume it like is the amount of stagger that the explosion applies. Force radius, this should typically be larger than the explosion radius, but for some reason I did it backwards here because I hate myself. Legacy up force, I don't know what this does. Explosion and blockers, leave these as they are in the prefab, and leave this checked. Oh, right, I should show you how to grab these from existing prefabs. Okay, so if we prefab load an explosive round, let's just take a 40 by 46 millimeter high explosive grenade. And we have the prefab here. If we click on you double click the projectile, you double click the force sound, then the best way to do this is to right click, copy component, and then create a new game object, and then right click it and hit paste component as new. And you can do this for all of these elements, or you can just only do it for one. But this is the best way of getting like the exact vanilla settings from an object. And I think you get the added bonus of not having it break on when you reload the editor, but don't quote me on that. So we have our force sound. This is sort of according to the prefab that I loaded from the game. This is more or less identical to a regular 40 millimeter grenade. I just played with the damage and explosion radius things a little bit. Damage, so curve damage and maximum damage. So the max damage here is set to 4,000. For reference, the player has 5,000 health, sort of by default in the game. I'm sure you know that. So scale your power of explosions around that. And the curve, this is like the damage fall off from explosion. So when you're like, halfway away from the explosion, you'll take, it's like 60% damage or something. You can make this whatever the hell you want. There's a default curve included in that script in the default curves.zip file you can play with. There's this damage curve exploded. Just play with that. Stun. This is for the stun radius. It doesn't damage SOSIGs, but it does fling them around and stun them. So it's helpful to have that be similar, if not the same curve as the explosion. Maybe a bit more forgiving because you want to do force damage in a larger radius than like blast damage, so you can still stun things without blowing them up. Blind and EMP. Blind is for flashbangs. Curve, max blind. I think this is the duration in seconds that a target is blinded, but don't quote me. EMP is the same way. There's a curve for the EMP, and then max EMP is like the duration in seconds that the EMP effect will continue. Well, at its maximum will exist. Vaporize and ignite. This is just like the ballistic projectile. Vaporize. It's used like the holy hand grenade and the explosive lemons. It'll do the source engine floating ragdoll that turns black and then fizzles out thing. Ignite. Does it set things on fire? And then based on where it is in the explosion, what's the chance it'll set you on fire? Directional damage. This can be kind of a fun one to play with. If this is checked, it'll use a vector that's just a generic transform. So this would be a directional angle pointing dead forward, or you can, rotate this. Just keep in mind it'll use that Z direction forward to define where it'll direct the damage. I don't know what any of these do. I don't even know. Prefab load and see if anything does something with that. And then shrapnel. I don't use this very often. I find the explosion is more than often enough. Just, it's usually good to just have an explosion, but you can play with this. This should be a ballistic projectile game object. min and max number of things that can spawn, number of shrapnel items, maximum distance that they'll travel, the range of velocities that they have, and then the radius. I believe this is the radius from the player that the thing will spawn this. I'm not totally sure. There's weird performance things that Anton does with shrapnel to make it so it doesn't just destroy your game when you fire a grenade that has like 100 shrapnel prefabs all firing at once. Yeah, play with this. I haven't used it very much. Look at how prefabs are set up in the base game. Then IFF, just leave this as 0. I think it gets dynamically modified by the game. Explosion sound. So you can rip, there's like basic grenade explosion sounds in the game you can pull using a software like Asset Studio, or you can make your own or find your own. It's all fine. Just keep in mind that these are very like bassy. They're sort of just like bass hits, because a lot of the main explosion sound comes from the tail that gets applied after it, which is down here. Pitch, range, play with that stuff. Fire on start should be checked. Obviously, you want it to explode. You want the sound to appear the moment that the grenade explodes. Loudness, this is like something to do with alerting NPCs. Leave this pretty high. And then IFF should just remain 0. And then kill after, just 3 seconds is fine. That's what the default is, I think. You don't want these game objects just clogging up your game. If you fire 1,000 grenades, you've got 1,000 objects just sitting there waiting to do something. So that should be set to 3 to clean the game up a bit. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. What else is there that we know about submunitions? I don't know. Just have fun with them. Like, they're sort of goofy. Like I said, you can spawn any prefab, and it goes to sort of cartoonish lengths. Like, the Meat Fortress syringe uses submunitions in an interesting way, where the main ballistic projectile, here I'll show you an example that I sort of modified from that, is it's a ballistic projectile, but it only, see here, it only exists for, its max range is only 0.5 meter. And then the moment it dies, it spawns a thrown melee object, which is, if you see it, it's just a melee weapon. And so it can stab things. It uses this stab collider, and it'll embed in things and bounce around the environment. But if you're doing this, just make sure you have a kill after script on it so you can, it doesn't clog up the game. But yeah, any prefab. The possibilities are literally endless, so just have fun with it. And make sure that they're own separate prefabs, of course. You want your projectile. This is the round. This is the ballistic projectile. This is the submunition. Make sure they're all separate prefabs, and that they all end up in your build item, because the game will freak out if it's trying to find a prefab that isn't in the build item when your round explodes, and it won't work correctly. So make sure that's in there. What else do we know here? That should basically be it. Just, again, make sure your build item has all the stuff in it that it needs to, all your prefabs for your explosions and your sound effects and your submunitions. Make sure your display data is properly filled out with the round type and class, and that this ballistics data is correct. Make sure your object ID has the round type assigned so Magazine Patcher doesn't freak out. Make sure, if you're spawning submunitions, that you actually have it set to spawn at least 1 submunition. Silly mistake, but it happens. Because if you have it set to spawn something, but it spawns 0 of that something, it won't work, obviously. It won't throw any errors, so you'll be confused. Okay, I think all that's left to do here is to build the mod and then test it in the game to make sure it works correctly. Whew. Okay, so now that we're in VR, the final thing to do is just to check to make sure our mod works. Let's grab our ammo panel. So the first thing you like to do is just find it. See if you can find it in the ammo panel. Does it show up? Yay, it shows up. If it doesn't, there's a good chance that something is fucked up about the display data. So just double check to make sure everything in there is correct. Can we spawn an ammo box full of it? Sure can. Does it look proper? Basically. Close enough. And then palm it. That looks pretty normal. Let's just grab some shells. Does it work in magazines? Sure does. Okay, it has the fire renderer. And our tracer renderer looks good too. So that's that. And you can check its position in the chamber. Wonderful. Looks good. Same as in vanilla. Okay, I think we can say with some pretty good certainty that this mod, oh boy, works. So that's amazing. If this about wraps up our tutorial. If you have any questions, or if I fucked something up, because I probably did, this entire video is essentially unscripted. So shoot me a DM, leave me a comment, tell me, please, tell me. If I don't know, I can't fix it, I can't clarify. Talk to me, please. I beg you. Yeah, thank you to GamerNair for making the original tutorial. Thank you for everyone who helped me get this figured out. And make sure to check the description for all of the resources that I talked about. And, yeah, have a good rest of your day. See you around.